The brown leather briefcase sat on the hood of Caleb Rourke's patrol car. Rain had darkened the leather around its corners, but the paper strip across the two locks was still intact. Isaiah Harper Estate, inventoried property. Simone Harper could read the printed words from where Rourke had placed her beside the rear passenger door. Her hands were cuffed behind her. The Buick Riviera stood several yards away with its trunk open. A second patrol vehicle was parked behind it. Deputy Owen Maddox stood beside that unit with a German Shepherd at his left leg and a clipboard resting against his forearm. Rourke looked toward him. "You get enough?" Maddox kept writing. "I'm finishing the deployment sheet." "That's not what I asked." Maddox capped his pen, then looked at the dog. "I document what the dog did." Rourke watched him for another second before turning back toward the briefcase. Simone shifted her weight. The cuffs gave her less room than the first time she had tried. "Officer." Rourke did not look at her. "The case is sealed estate property." "I heard you. You haven't told me what gives you authority to open it." Rourke placed one palm against the hood beside the case. "You've had plenty of time to cooperate. I've answered your questions. You've challenged every step of the stop. I asked what each step was based on." Rourke finally faced her. His expression did not change. "That distinction may matter to you. It should matter to the report." Maddox looked up from his clipboard. Rourke noticed. "Finish your paperwork." Maddox moved back toward his vehicle. The dog followed without pulling at the leash. Simone watched the clipboard disappear through the open driver's door. She had not been close enough to read the final entry. She had seen the boxes. Start time. End time. Handler observations. Final response. Maddox had filled something into the last section before closing the form. Rourke walked to the Riviera. He had already taken Simone's keys. Now he opened the trunk farther and leaned inside. A canvas overnight bag stood near the left wheel well. A small plastic storage bin sat behind it. The space where the briefcase had been was empty. Rourke checked beneath the trunk mat again. Then he came back, carrying a thin black evidence marker. He placed it beside the case on the patrol car. Simone watched him. "You're marking it as evidence?" "I'm documenting what I found. It was in my trunk. I know where it was. You haven't identified a crime connected to it." Rourke adjusted the marker so its number faced the front of the cruiser. "That decision isn't yours." A truck passed in the opposite lane. Its tires sprayed water across the center line. Rourke waited until the sound faded. Then he picked up the briefcase. The estate seal stretched across both locks and continued around the handle. Someone from the probate inventory company had pressed a small raised stamp into the paper. Simone had watched the seal applied. Not tonight. Months earlier. A folding table. A legal pad. Her mother signing an inventory page without opening the case. The briefcase had remained closed because nobody had known whether the papers inside were personal, departmental, or something that required formal review. Now Rourke turned it over in his hands as though the seal were simply packaging. "Set it down," Simone said. He looked at her. That was not an order. It sounded like one. It was a request not to damage property while I'm restrained. Rourke placed the case back on the hood. "That better?" "For now." His mouth moved slightly. Not a smile. More like he had received confirmation of something. He walked toward Maddox's unit. Simone could not hear the first sentence between them. Maddox answered quietly. Rourke pointed once toward the Buick. Maddox shook his head. Rourke said something else. Maddox looked toward Simone, then toward the briefcase. After a few seconds, he opened his driver's door and placed the clipboard inside. He did not tear off a page. He did not hand anything to Rourke. When Rourke returned, he had stopped asking Maddox questions. That mattered. Simone stored it away. Rourke opened the rear compartment of his cruiser. Plastic evidence bags. Traffic cones. A folded reflective vest. A roadside emergency kit. He moved 2 items aside and reached deeper. Simone watched his hand come back holding a compact pry tool. Maddox saw it too. He remained beside his vehicle. "Rourke." Rourke stopped. Maddox did not approach. "You want me clear before you continue?" Rourke looked at him. "You're done here." Maddox glanced toward the briefcase. "My deployment is done." "Then we agree." Maddox hesitated, then opened his door. He did not leave. He sat behind the wheel with the door still open. Rourke walked back to the hood. Simone could see rain collecting on the paper seal. The printed estate number remained readable. Rourke turned the pry tool once in his hand. "You said this belonged to your father." "It belongs to his estate." "Same difference." "No." He looked up. Simone continued. "One is a relationship, the other is a documented legal status." Rourke placed the tip of the tool beneath the edge of the first lock. "You always talk like this during traffic stops?" "Only when a traffic stop reaches a sealed briefcase." He pressed lightly. The paper pulled tight. Simone looked past him toward Maddox's patrol vehicle. The clipboard was still visible on the passenger seat. Rourke followed her glance. Then he looked back at the seal. "What are you expecting me to find?" "I haven't opened it." "That's convenient." "It's documented." "By who?" "The estate inventory." 74. "You have that paperwork?" "Yes." "Where?" "In the document sleeve you removed from the trunk." Rourke's eyes shifted toward the Buick. For the first time since placing the case on the hood, he stopped moving. The sleeve was still inside the open trunk. He had carried it out earlier. Looked through it, placed it back. Simone waited. Rourke did not retrieve it. Instead, he adjusted the pry tool. "You can verify the inventory before damaging the seal." He pressed the metal deeper beneath the lock. Simone kept her voice level. "If you open it, put the reason in your report exactly as it exists now." Rourke looked at her. The paper seal was still whole between his hand and the steel lock. Then he tightened his grip on the tool. Simone Harper signed the release form where the yellow tab pointed. The estate administrator turned the page, compared the signature to Simone's driver's license, then added her own initials beside the inventory number. "That's it." Simone looked at the brown briefcase on the counter. "That's really it?" "For this item, yes." The administrator slid a clear document sleeve toward her. Inside were the inventory sheet, the release receipt, and a copy of the probate authorization naming Simone as personal representative for Isaiah Harper's estate. The procedure had taken less than 5 minutes. No raised voices. No second manager. No unexplained waiting period. The administrator had checked Simone's identification, matched the estate file, recorded the transfer, and returned her license. Normal verification had an ending. Simone picked up the briefcase by its worn handle. The paper seal crossed both locks. "Still unopened?" she asked. "Since inventory." The administrator pointed to the embossed stamp. "If that seal gets broken before the estate review is finished, document who opened it and why." Simone nodded. "Understood." She placed the document sleeve beside the case. Her father had owned the briefcase for longer than Simone could remember. Isaiah Harper carried it to union meetings, city offices, insurance appointments, and eventually the hospital during the last year of his life. He had never treated it like something mysterious. It had simply been the brown case he took when a conversation involved paper someone might later deny seeing. After his death, the case had gone through the same inventory process as everything else in his small house. Furniture, bank files, tools, old tax folders, a shoebox of photographs. Nobody had opened the briefcase because its contents were not required to settle the first stage of probate. The locks had been photographed, the case had been listed, and the temporary inventory seal had been applied. Simone was taking it home because the estate attorney wanted the remaining personal papers sorted before the next filing. Nothing about the trip was urgent. She placed the case in the trunk of her father's dark green Buick Riviera. The Buick had become hers through the same estate process. It was old enough that people at gas stations sometimes asked what year it was. Isaiah had kept the chrome clean and a folded towel beneath the driver's seat to protect the carpet from his work shoes. Simone kept the towel there. She also kept the registration in a plastic folder beneath the owner's manual. Before leaving the estate office, she put the clear probate sleeve beside it. The briefcase went deeper in the trunk, between an overnight bag and a plastic storage bin. Then she drove north. For most of the afternoon, nobody paid attention to her. At a service station outside Branton, a man in a new pickup looked over the Buick while filling his tank. "Nice car." "My father's." "He keep it original?" "Mostly." The man nodded toward the rear quarter panel. "Hard to find them like that anymore." Simone paid for coffee, returned to the Buick, and continued toward Millstone County. The road narrowed after the county line. 2 lanes, wet shoulders, long stretches between businesses. She had been inside Millstone less than 15 minutes when a sheriff's cruiser appeared behind her. Simone checked the speedometer, a little under the limit. She looked at the rearview mirror again. The cruiser remained there through one intersection, then another. At the next straight section, the lights came on. Simone signaled and pulled onto the shoulder. She lowered the window before the deputy reached the door. Caleb Rourke stood slightly behind the window line. License. Simone took it from her wallet. Reason for the stop? Lane position. She handed him the license. I wasn't aware I crossed the line. I didn't say you crossed it. Rourke looked through the side window. His flashlight passed across the rear seat, then returned to Simone. Where are you coming from? Branton. Where before that? An estate office. His flashlight moved toward the back of the car. What estate? My father's. Rourke looked at the license again. Whose vehicle? Mine. Recently? Transferred through the estate. Rourke walked toward the rear plate. Simone waited. He returned without giving the license back. Registration. It's in the glove compartment. Get it. Simone moved slowly, opened the compartment, and removed the plastic vehicle folder. She handed him the registration. Rourke compared the name. Simone Harper. Same address as the license. He looked at the windshield VIN, then back at the registration. Nothing on his face suggested a mismatch. He still held both documents. What did you inherit? The car. What else? Simone paused. That isn't a vehicle registration question. Rourke looked toward the trunk. You said you came from an estate office. Yes. What are you carrying from there? Personal estate property. What kind? Documents and personal effects. Rourke shifted the registration beneath her license. Open the trunk. For what purpose? To verify what you just told me. Simone looked at him. My registration verifies the vehicle. That verifies the registration. The VIN is visible. I saw it. And the name matches. Rourke's thumb rested against the edge of her license. I'm asking about the property. Simone understood the change. The stop had begun with lane position, then vehicle ownership. Now the vehicle paperwork had matched, and the subject had moved again. There's probate documentation in the glove compartment, she said. Rourke said nothing. It identifies the estate, the released property, the inventory number, and me as the authorized recipient. Get it. Simone removed the clear sleeve and passed it through the window. Rourke opened the first page. He read long enough to find Isaiah Harper's name, then Simone's. The inventory number appeared on the release receipt and again on the authorization sheet behind it. Rourke turned the sleeve over. This doesn't tell me what's physically in the car. It identifies what was released to me today. I asked what's in the car. You asked me to verify what I told you. Rourke glanced at her. Simone did not continue. He walked back to his cruiser carrying her license, registration, and probate sleeve. A white sedan passed them, then a delivery van. Simone watched through the mirror as Rourke sat behind his steering wheel. He used the computer. He looked down at the sleeve. Then he used the computer again. Several minutes passed. When he returned, he gave Simone only the registration. He kept the license and probate papers. Step out of the vehicle. Simone looked at the documents still in his hand. Did anything fail verification? We're beyond a simple registration check. What are we checking now? Rourke stepped back from the door. Possible concealed property requiring further verification. Simone stayed seated for 1 second longer. There had been no problem with the vehicle record. No problem with her name. No problem with the probate release. Rourke had received the easiest correction available. He had changed the reason instead. Step out. Simone opened the door. Rourke moved one hand toward the back of the Buick. Leave the trunk closed for now. She stepped onto the shoulder. Rourke still held the clear probate sleeve. Further verification, he said, is standard when the circumstances don't add up. The papers in his hand already did. Rourke stopped beside the rear quarter panel before Simone had fully closed the driver's door. He looked at the trunk, then at the probate sleeve in his hand. His radio remained clipped to his shoulder. Simone stood near the front fender where he had directed her. Traffic passed several yards away, close enough to move the loose edge of her jacket each time a truck went by. Rourke pressed the radio button. "County, update my stop." A dispatcher answered. Rourke gave his unit number and location. Then he paused. Simone watched him choose the words. Possible concealed property concern. Additional verification requested. The radio clicked off. Nothing in the Buick had changed. The registration still carried Simone's name. The VIN still matched. The probate papers still identified Isaiah Harper's estate, the inventory number, and Simone as the authorized recipient. Only the description had changed. Simone looked toward Rourke. "What property concern?" He tucked her license behind the probate sleeve. "I'm determining that. You just transmitted one." "I transmitted the status of the stop." "What fact created that status?" Rourke pointed toward the shoulder. "Stay where you are." Simone did. She stopped explaining. That was different from agreeing. Rourke walked to his cruiser and opened the driver's door without getting inside. He leaned toward the mobile terminal, typed something, then looked back at the Buick. Simone could not see the screen. She could see the clock above it. Several more minutes passed. A pickup slowed as it went by. The driver looked toward Simone, then toward the cruiser. He accelerated again. Rourke returned with the probate sleeve, but not her license. "Do you have anything illegal in the vehicle?" "No." "Narcotics?" "No." "Weapons?" "No." "Large amounts of cash?" "No." "Anything another officer would need to know before entering the vehicle?" "The estate briefcase is sealed." Rourke glanced toward the trunk. "Why?" "Because it was inventoried that way." "What's inside?" "I told you. Personal estate papers and property." "You don't know?" "I haven't opened it." Rourke shifted the sleeve beneath his arm. "You inherited a locked case and never checked what was inside. It was released today. You drove across county lines with it." "Yes." "And you expect me not to ask questions?" "I've answered your questions." Rourke looked toward the Buick again. Simone waited. He had changed from lane position to ownership. Ownership to estate property. Estate property to concealed property. Now the fact that she had respected the probate seal was being presented as another reason for suspicion. Rourke pressed his radio. "County, do we have a canine unit available?" The answer came several seconds later. Simone turned her head slightly. Rourke noticed. "Remain where you are." "I am." The dispatcher returned. "Canine 12 is clearing a call. Approximately 12 minutes. Send him." Rourke released the radio. Simone looked at the time on the cruiser dashboard. "What is the canine being requested to investigate?" "Véhicule extérieur." "For what?" "Possible indicators." "What indicators?" Rourke's mouth tightened briefly. "You've got an unusual amount of interest in controlling how this stop is conducted." Simone let the sentence sit between them. Then she asked one more question. "Did dispatch report drugs, a weapon, stolen property, or a wanted person connected to this car?" "No." Rourke answered quickly. Too quickly to pretend he had misunderstood. Simone nodded once. She said nothing else. Rourke took the probate sleeve back to his cruiser. This time, he sat down. From where Simone stood, she could see him typing into the terminal. The screen reflected faintly against the windshield. He entered several lines. Then he reached for the radio again. "Add canine requested for suspicious property verification." The dispatcher repeated the phrase. Simone looked at the dashboard clock again. The wording now belonged to more than Rourke. A system had received it. A dispatcher had repeated it. A second unit was responding to it. The description had begun moving ahead of the facts. Rourke stepped from the cruiser. "Do you consent to a search?" "No." His face did not change. "All right." He said it as if her answer completed something. Simone looked at him. "My refusal does not create probable cause." "I didn't say it did." "Then record it accurately." Rourke folded the probate sleeve against his palm. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Simone looked toward the Buick instead of answering. The trunk remained closed. That mattered. For now, a county utility truck passed in the opposite direction. Its driver raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel toward Rourke. Rourke returned the gesture. The truck continued without slowing. Several minutes later, another sheriff's vehicle appeared behind them. It was a utility SUV with a canine unit marking along the rear quarter panel. It stopped behind Rourke's cruiser. Deputy Owen Maddox stepped out first. He was carrying a clipboard. The dog remained inside the SUV. Maddox looked at Simone, then the Buick, then Rourke. "What have we got?" "Suspicious estate property. Driver's story keeps expanding. Sealed container in the trunk." Simone did not interrupt. Maddox looked at the probate sleeve in Rourke's hand. "Vehicle stolen?" "No." "Registration issue?" "No." "Any narcotics information attached to the plate?" "Not that I've received." Maddox's eyes returned to the Buick. "Consent?" "No." Rourke answered for her. Maddox lowered the clipboard. "What's the deployment basis?" Rourke gestured toward the trunk. "Totality of the circumstances." Maddox waited. Rourke added, "Unusual property. Cross-county travel. Inconsistent explanation." Simone looked at him. Her explanation had not changed once. Maddox opened the metal clip on his board. A county canine deployment worksheet sat underneath. He wrote the location. He entered Rourke's unit number. Then he reached the line marked, "Requesting officer's articulated basis." His pen stopped. "Give me the specific behavior." Rourke looked toward Simone. She became increasingly focused on limiting the investigation. Maddox did not write yet. "She refused consent? That's part of the encounter. Not my question." Rourke shifted his weight. "She's transporting a sealed container she claims she hasn't opened. Anything from the vehicle?" "No." "Odor?" "No." "Visibly contraband?" "No." Maddox finally wrote something. Simone could not read it from where she stood. Rourke could. He looked down at the worksheet for several seconds. The dog was still inside the SUV. The trunk was still closed. And beneath the requesting officer's name, the first independent form of the stop had begun. The box for the canine result remained empty. Owen Maddox opened the rear door of the canine SUV and clipped a lead onto the dog's harness. Rourke moved toward the Buick. "Keep her back from the vehicle." Maddox looked at Simone, who was already standing near the front fender. "She's fine there." Rourke stopped. Maddox walked the dog toward the passenger side without speaking to Simone. He gave the animal room around the front bumper, then continued along the doors and rear quarter panel. Simone watched his hands more than the dog. They stayed low. The dog paused near one tire, moved on, checked the trunk seam, then continued around the driver's side. Maddox completed the circuit and returned toward the SUV. Rourke followed him. "Anything at the rear?" Maddox unclipped the lead only after the dog was back inside. "Nothing I would call an alert." "You saw the change near the trunk." "I saw him check the trunk. He stayed there longer." "Not an alert." Maddox returned to the clipboard. The result line that had been empty now received a short entry. "No trained alert observed." He initialed beside it. Rourke read the line. "Can you run him again?" Maddox looked up. "For what?" "To make sure." "I made sure." Rourke lowered his voice. "You didn't see any interest?" "Interest isn't the standard. I'm asking what you observed." "And I wrote what I observed." Simone could not read the worksheet from the fender, but she had heard enough. The dog had been the reason to wait. Now the dog was finished. Rourke still had her license. He also still had the probate sleeve. Maddox glanced at the sleeve under Rourke's arm. "Those the estate papers?" "Yes." "They check?" "The paperwork checks." "Registration?" "Checks." Maddox rested the clipboard against the hood of his SUV. "So what are you still trying to establish?" Rourke looked toward Simone before answering. "She says there's a sealed container in the trunk that she received through the estate and hasn't opened." Maddox waited. "That was the basis before I got here. It's still unresolved. My dog isn't going to tell you who owns a briefcase." "I know that." "Then my part is done." The exchange lasted less than a minute. Simone looked at Rourke. "What fact are you investigating now that you did not have before you called him?" Rourke turned toward her. "The canine is one part of an investigation." "That wasn't my question. You told me you're transporting property you can't fully identify." "I told you that before you requested the dog." Rourke took 2 steps toward her. "You also told me you haven't opened it." "Yes." "And you don't know every item inside." "It came sealed from an estate inventory." "That does not tell me what is physically inside it." Simone stopped there. The answer had finally become circular. The sealed case required suspicion because it was sealed. And because it was sealed, nothing she said about its documented origin was going to satisfy him. Maddox closed the metal clip over the worksheet. Rourke. Rourke looked back. You've got a negative deployment, current registration, and estate paperwork. If there's something else, say what it is. I have enough to continue looking at it. That's your call. It is. Tack. Maddox did not argue. He also did not change the form. Rourke returned to his cruiser and keyed the radio. County. Start an incident number off this stop. The dispatcher asked for a classification. Rourke looked through the windshield toward the Buick. Investigative detention. Suspicious property. Simone heard the keyboard on the other end before the dispatcher read back the new event number. The stop now had a second identity. It had started with a claimed traffic concern, then vehicle ownership, then concealed property. Now it was an investigative detention with its own incident number. Rourke wrote the number on the back of a small field card. He walked back toward Simone. Give me the vehicle keys. She looked at him. For what purpose? The Buick is remaining here while I get a supervisor to review the property issue. Am I free to leave? No. Are you arresting me? Not at this time. Am I being detained because the dog alerted? No. Because the registration failed? No. Because the probate documents failed? Rourke held out his hand. I'm not doing this question by question. Simone removed the Buick key fob from her pocket. She placed it in his palm. I am not consenting to access or a search. I heard you. Rourke slipped the key into the same hand that held her license. That changed more than the conversation had. Until then, Simone had been standing beside a car she could theoretically drive when the stop ended. Now the person extending the stop controlled the license and the key. Maddox looked from Rourke's hand to the worksheet. Are you asking me to remain? For now. My deployment is complete. I want you here until the supervisor gets here. Maddox checked his radio. I have another availability request pending. This takes priority. Then put that through dispatch. Rourke stared at him for a moment. Maddox waited. Rourke lifted his radio. County. Keep Canine 12 attached pending supervisor response. The dispatcher acknowledged it. Another entry had been created. Maddox wrote the new time beside the bottom margin of his worksheet. Simone noticed the movement. She said nothing. Rourke walked to the rear of the Buick, but did not touch the trunk release. Instead, he looked at the seam where the lid met the body. You said the case was transferred directly to you? Yes. Today? Yes. Who sealed it? The Estate Inventory Service. You have their contact information? It is in the paperwork you're holding. Rourke opened the probate sleeve again. He found the page. For several seconds, he read the contact block without taking out his phone. Maddox could see the page from where he stood. That looks like another verification path. Rourke closed the sleeve. I'm waiting for my supervisor. The phone number remained on the page. Nobody called it. Simone looked once toward the key in Rourke's hand, then back toward the highway. The easiest correction was still available. Rourke had chosen an incident number instead. The canine tablet showed a green submission bar. Owen Maddox held it against the steering wheel of his SUV, while the completed worksheet uploaded through the county network. Rourke noticed. What are you sending? My deployment report. I thought you were staying attached. I am. Then leave it open. Maddox looked at the screen. The deployment is finished. The incident isn't. End quote. Different thing. The upload continued. Simone stood near the Buick's front fender. Her key was still in Rourke's pocket. Her license and probate sleeve remained under his arm. Rourke walked closer to the canine SUV. I want the supervisor to see the whole scene first. He can. Before you close anything. Maddox tapped the result field. I already closed my part. The same words appeared on the screen that he had written on the worksheet. No trained alert observed. Below the entry sat the deployment start and completion times. Rourke read them. Can you add that the dog showed interest at the trunk? I can add what happened. He stopped there. He checked there. That's what I mean. It isn't what you said. Rourke rested one hand on the open SUV door. I'm not asking you to change the result. Good. I'm asking for context. Maddox scrolled to the narrative field. He entered one sentence. The canine conducted an exterior examination of the vehicle and completed the deployment without a trained alert. Rourke read it. That doesn't mention the pause. It doesn't need to. The progress bar reached the end. A confirmation number appeared beneath it. Maddox copied the number onto the paper worksheet. Then he placed the tablet in its mount. The record was no longer only on the roadside. Simone saw Rourke glance at the confirmation number. He turned away from the SUV. "How much longer for your supervisor?" she asked. Rourke checked his radio. "He's coming." "That wasn't the verification I asked about." Rourke looked at her. "What verification?" "The estate inventory contact." "We're past that right now. The number is on the page you have. I know where it is. Has anyone called it?" Rourke did not answer immediately. His radio gave a short dispatch tone. He pressed the button. "County? Status on supervisor?" The dispatcher answered that the supervisor was clearing another call. No arrival time followed. Rourke lowered the radio. Simone looked at the probate sleeve. "So nothing is pending with the estate service." "I'm waiting for supervision." "That is not the same thing." Rourke shifted the sleeve to his other hand. "I'm not debating procedure on the shoulder." Simone stopped speaking. A verification number sat inches from his thumb. He had chosen a person who was not there. Maddox opened his own radio channel. Canine 12. Deployment complete. Remaining attached at requesting deputy's direction. The dispatcher acknowledged him. Rourke looked back. "You didn't need to phrase it that way." Maddox returned the microphone to its clip. "That's why I'm still here." Simone watched Rourke walk toward his cruiser. He opened the driver's door and sat behind the mobile terminal. The incident screen remained active. Maddox stayed by his SUV. Several minutes passed. The next call appeared on Maddox's tablet. A domestic alarm across the county. He read the location, then looked toward Rourke. "I've got a pending canine request." "You're attached here. My deployment here is complete. I told dispatch to keep you." And they recorded why. Rourke stepped back out. "Your presence may still be needed." "For another sniff?" "No." "Then what?" Rourke glanced at Simone. "Scene support." Maddox looked at the Buick, then at Simone standing without restraints near the fender. "What support?" Rourke's jaw tightened. "I'm not releasing a unit while this is active." Maddox picked up his radio. "I need dispatch to assign that pending request elsewhere." The reply came several seconds later. Another canine unit would take it. Maddox acknowledged. Then he entered a short availability note in his tablet. Held on prior incident after deployment completion. Rourke watched him type. The delay now had its own line. Simone looked down the shoulder at passing traffic. She did not know the family involved in the other call. She did not know whether the second canine would arrive quickly. She knew only why Maddox had not gone. Rourke had kept him. The radio traffic had recorded that too. A dark county SUV eventually appeared in the distance. Rourke straightened. "Supervisor." Maddox looked toward the approaching vehicle. Simone stayed where she was. Rourke removed the probate sleeve from beneath his arm and opened it before the SUV reached them. He found the inventory page again. This time, he took out his phone. Simone watched his thumb stop above the screen. The supervisor's SUV pulled in behind the cruiser. Rourke put the phone away without dialing. A sergeant stepped out and walked toward him. Rourke met him halfway. "Vehicle stop expanded into a suspicious property investigation," Rourke said. The sergeant looked toward the Buick. "What do you have?" "Unopened estate container. Driver can't identify all contents." "Canine?" Rourke glanced toward Maddox. "No alert." The sergeant looked back at him. "Ownership?" "Confirmed." "Estate paperwork?" "Appears consistent." The sergeant held out his hand. Rourke gave him the probate sleeve. He read the inventory page. His finger stopped beside the service contact. "You call this number?" "Not yet." "Why not?" "I wanted you here first." The sergeant looked toward Simone, then toward Maddox. Maddox remained beside his SUV. His report was already gone from the scene. The sergeant returned his attention to Rourke. "Call them." Rourke took the sleeve back. Before he could move, Maddox's tablet sounded once. Submission accepted. The canine report had entered the unit archive. Rourke heard it. He looked at Maddox. "That report is final?" "My deployment report is." Rourke held the estate page in one hand and his phone in the other. He finally dialed the printed number. The call rang twice. Then an automated system answered. The office had closed for the day. Rourke ended the call. "We'll need to continue this another way." Simone looked at the phone. The number had been available before the office closed. Nobody on the shoulder said otherwise. And now the missed call had a time of its own. "What are you putting for the hold?" The sergeant stood beside Rourke's cruiser, while the incident screen remained open on the mobile terminal. Rourke had selected a property status menu. Simone could see only part of the screen from where she stood beside the Buick, but she heard the answer. "Estate property pending verification." The sergeant looked at the probate sleeve. "Ownership of the car is confirmed?" "Yes." "License valid?" "Yes." "Canine result?" "No alert." The sergeant rested one hand on the cruiser door. "So what exactly are we holding?" Rourke looked toward the Buick. "The sealed container until we can establish what she's transporting and whether she has authority over all of it." Simone had already produced the probate paperwork identifying her as the estate representative. The inventory page listed the container by description and included the service number Rourke had finally called after the office closed. She did not repeat any of that. Instead, she watched him type. The sergeant leaned closer to the terminal. Rourke selected a category from the menu. Property verification pending. Beneath it, he opened a narrative field. The cursor blinked. Driver presented probate paperwork, he dictated quietly while typing. Driver unable to identify contents of sealed container. Outside verification unavailable after hours. Simone looked at the phone still in Rourke's hand. "Read that last sentence again." Rourke stopped typing. "I'm completing the incident." "I heard you." The sergeant turned toward her. Simone kept her hands at her sides. "I'd like the hold reason read before it is submitted." Rourke faced the screen again. "Outside verification unavailable after hours." "That office was open when I gave you the number." Rourke looked back at her. "It isn't open now." "That is a different fact." The sergeant looked at the probate page, then at Rourke. "When did she give you the contact?" "Earlier." "How much earlier?" "We were still working through the scene." Maddox remained near his canine SUV. He had been packing equipment into the rear compartment. The sergeant looked toward him. "When did you finish your deployment?" Maddox gave the time from memory. Rourke's first attempt to call the inventory service came well after that. Nobody needed to calculate the difference aloud. The sergeant returned to the screen, put the attempted call time in. Rourke's fingers stayed above the keyboard for a moment. Then he added it. He did not add the time Simone first provided the number. Simone saw the difference immediately. "So the record shows when you called." "Yes, but not when the number became available." Rourke closed the narrative window halfway. "It's an incident report, not a transcript." The sergeant did not correct him. He pulled the probate sleeve closer and examined the first page again. "What's your basis for holding the vehicle?" "I'm not saying the vehicle is stolen." "That wasn't my question." Rourke shifted his weight. "The container is secured inside it. I don't want the property moving until we finish verification." The sergeant considered that. Then he pointed at the terminal. "Separate the car from the property in the entry." Rourke reopened the screen. He changed the primary item from vehicle to sealed estate container. For several seconds, it looked like the decision was becoming narrower. Then he opened another field. Vehicle retained to preserve access to held property. Simone read the sentence from where she stood. "You're keeping the whole car because the case is inside it. For tonight. You have the key." "Yes. You could document the container and release the vehicle." Rourke shook his head. "I'm not transferring custody of something we haven't verified. The paperwork identifies it." "The paperwork identifies a container." Simone looked at the probate sleeve. The sealed briefcase had been described by color, approximate dimensions, and estate inventory reference. Rourke had stopped calling the documents suspicious. Now they were simply insufficient. Maddox closed the rear door of his SUV. Before getting inside, he approached the sergeant. "My deployment report already went through." "I know. It lists the completion time." Rourke looked at him. "We've covered the dog." Maddox nodded. "I'm telling him where the time is." The sergeant gave a short acknowledgement. That was all. Maddox returned to his unit. Rourke resumed typing. His narrative described the stop as developing into a suspicious property inquiry after Simone could not independently identify the contents of an estate container. It noted that a canine unit had been requested. It noted that no trained alert occurred. Then it said investigative concerns remained because ownership of the container's contents could not be verified through an outside source. The sentence was technically shaped around facts. The order of those facts did the work. The report did not say the outside source had been available earlier. It did not say Simone had requested that call. It did not say the call was postponed while they waited for the supervisor. It did not say the source became unreachable during the delay. The sergeant read the narrative once. He tapped a line near the bottom. Change refused to identify contents. She said she didn't know every item, correct? Rourke deleted the word. He replaced it with, unable to identify contents. Simone heard the correction. It was better. It was still not the same as what had happened. She had never claimed personal knowledge of everything sealed inside another person's estate property. The inventory process existed because she was transporting assets documented by the estate, not because she had opened and memorized them. Rourke moved to the disposition page. Temporary property hold, pending next business day verification. The sergeant asked, any criminal charge? Not at this point. Any contraband? No. Any stolen return? No. The sergeant stared at the screen for another second. Then he entered his supervisor identification. The system required a reason for approval. He selected, pending external verification. Simone watched him press the confirmation key. The hold generated an electronic property reference. Rourke copied it onto a printed receipt. He walked over and offered Simone the paper. She took it. Her name appeared at the top. The Buick appeared beneath it. Then the sealed estate container. At the bottom, a short paragraph stated that the items had been retained because verification could not be completed during the roadside investigation. Simone read it twice. Who wrote this language? It's the system disposition. It's the system. That isn't what I asked. Rourke pointed toward the reference number. That's what you'll need tomorrow. Simone folded nothing. She kept the receipt flat in her hand. Behind her, the Buick remained parked with its doors closed. Maddox's negative canine report was already stored in another system. The dispatch channel held the time he had finished. Rourke's phone held the later outgoing call to the estate service. Now the county incident held another version. Verification had not been delayed. According to the new record, it simply could not be completed. Rourke returned to his cruiser and transmitted the status. County. Property hold established. External verification pending. Dispatch repeated the status back. The sergeant approved the release of Maddox from the scene. Simone looked down at the receipt again. Her name was no longer attached only to a traffic stop. It was attached to a county property hold. At 8:46 the next morning, Simone stood at the county property window without her car. The rideshare receipt was still open on her phone. Behind the glass, a clerk entered the property reference from the paper Rourke had handed her the night before. The screen loaded Simone's name, the Buick, and the sealed estate container. The clerk read for several seconds. Your hold is still active. The verification office opened this morning. I see that. Simone waited. The clerk clicked another tab. There's an attachment. He opened it. The estate inventory service had sent a confirmation shortly after opening. The document identified the probate file, Simone's authority as estate representative, the inventory reference attached to the sealed container, and the contact information already printed on the paperwork Rourke had possessed the previous evening. The clerk moved the mouse toward another field. Verification came in at 8:38. Simone looked at the wall clock. And the hold? Still active. What information is missing? The clerk looked at the screen again. It doesn't say anything is missing. Then why is it still active? He turned the monitor slightly away from the glass. I can receive the confirmation. I can't clear a sheriff's hold. It was an ordinary answer. The kind given at pharmacy counters, insurance desks, and government windows when the person in front of the screen could see the problem but did not own the button that fixed it. Simone placed the printed receipt on the counter. Who can clear it? The initiating unit or a supervisor. Has either been notified? The clerk checked the activity history. Notification went out when the attachment posted. Time? 8:40. Simone wrote it on the back of her rideshare receipt. She did not ask him whether he thought the hold was fair. She asked for a copy of the verification document. The clerk printed it. The estate service confirmation took 1 page. Nothing on it required the container to be opened. Nothing suggested stolen property. Nothing contradicted the probate packet. At 9:17, the status still read active. Simone called the estate inventory service herself. An inventory coordinator answered after Simone gave the file reference and verified her identity. Yes, we sent confirmation. To whom? The county address provided in the request. When? 8:38 this morning. Did the request require you to inspect the contents? No. We verified the estate inventory reference and your authority to transport the listed property. Simone looked through the glass at the county screen. Was anything unclear in the documents? No. The coordinator paused. The request came in after our office closed yesterday. That's why it rolled to this morning. Simone wrote that down too. When did the request reach you? The coordinator gave the time. It matched Rourke's late call. Simone thanked her and ended the call. At 9:43, the clerk tried the patrol supervisor again. This time someone answered. The clerk spoke quietly, mostly in short administrative phrases. Verification attached. No charge. Correct. Still sealed. He listened. Then he looked at Simone. They're reviewing the original incident. Who? The supervisor. Is there a new concern? I wasn't given one. Another hour passed. The Buick sat inside the contractor lot behind the property building. Simone could see part of its roof through a chain-link fence from the waiting area. Her key remained checked into county custody. The sealed container remained inside the vehicle because the hold order had tied the car to the property. A tow intake document showed the arrival time from the night before. The storage ledger had already moved from intake day to the next billing day, although the responsibility field still read agency hold billing pending. Simone asked for a copy. The clerk gave her one. At 10:52, Rourke called the property desk. The clerk answered within Simone's hearing but did not use speakerphone. Yes, deputy. He listened. The outside confirmation is attached. Another pause. No, it doesn't identify every individual item inside. The clerk listened again. It verifies the inventory reference. Simone watched his pen stop above a yellow notepad. Then he said, I understand. He hung up. What is the current reason for the hold? The clerk hesitated. He said the original circumstances still need supervisory review. What current fact prevents release? I can't answer that. Did he provide one? The clerk looked back at the monitor. No new one. Simone nodded once. Please note that, I asked. The clerk opened the activity field and entered a short sentence. Owner requested specific current basis for continued hold after external verification received. He saved it. The new entry carried its own time. Just after 11:30, the sergeant approved release. The computer status changed before anyone came to tell Simone. Hold cleared. The clerk noticed it and printed the release authorization. The sealed container had never been opened. No criminal charge had been filed. No contraband had been documented. The estate confirmation had taken less than 10 minutes after the outside office opened. Returning the Buick took another 40 minutes because the contractor had to close its custody ticket, retrieve the key, and document the vehicle leaving the lot. Simone signed only for receipt of the vehicle. Beside the signature line was a box stating that release did not constitute agreement with the original hold. She left that box unchecked because nobody had asked her to agree. Before walking out, she asked for 3 documents: the external verification, the hold activity history, the tow custody record. The clerk handed them across the counter. The coordinator from the estate service called again, while Simone was standing beside the Buick. I checked something after we spoke, she said. Simone unlocked the driver's door. What? I can't give you another client's information, but your county has contacted us before about estate property stopped in transit. Simone stopped with the door half open. How recently? Within the last month? During business hours? There was a pause. No. Simone looked at the verification sheet in her hand. Yesterday, after-hours availability had been presented as an unavoidable problem. Now it had become something else. A sequence. The first page of the county records packet had a black bar across the driver's name. Simone noticed everything else. The incident had occurred 5 weeks earlier. Same county. Same estate inventory service. Same problem. A driver had been transporting sealed property from a deceased relative's estate after the verification office had closed. Simone sat at her kitchen table with her Buick key beside the packet. Her narrow records request had asked for recent field contacts involving that service, after-hours verification, and estate property, temporarily questioned by patrol. The county had produced one responsive file. The demographic field identified the earlier driver as white. The officer had photographed the probate appointment letter, the inventory reference, and the intact seal. Then he had written, "External confirmation. Unavailable after business hours." Simone read the next field, "Disposition. Released pending follow-up verification." She read it again. The earlier driver had kept his vehicle. The sealed property had gone with him. The estate service confirmed the documents the following morning. The officer added the confirmation to the original contact and closed the matter. The supervisor approval field contained the same sergeant code that appeared on Simone's overnight property hold. Simone pulled her own copies from a folder. Her estate documents had been available. Her container had remained sealed. The canine deployment had produced no alert supporting further seizure. External verification had been unavailable because the office was closed. Those facts had led to a different disposition. Her line read, "Temporary protective property hold pending external verification." She placed the 2 pages side by side. The difference was not hidden in legal language. One file treated unavailable verification as something that could wait until morning. The other treated it as a reason to take a car and estate property until morning. Simone opened the county complaint portal. She did not type a paragraph about motive. She attached the 2 reports. Then, the canine report. Then the property hold activity history. In the complaint summary, she wrote one sentence. "Please identify the documented fact that required a hold in my incident, but permitted release in the comparable incident." She submitted it. The system generated a complaint reference and sent copies to the county standards office and the patrol command mailbox. By early afternoon, the standards intake analyst had sent a clarification request to Rourke's unit. The email contained 4 attachments. Simone's original incident report, the negative canine report, the external verification confirmation, the redacted comparator. Rourke received the email while completing reports from another shift. He opened the comparator first. The earlier officer had written only 3 short sentences about the estate property. Documents appeared consistent. The seal was intact. Verification would continue during business hours. Rourke moved to Simone's file. His report used different language. Uncertainty regarding lawful possession. Need for additional verification. Continued questions during investigation. Officer concern regarding control of property. He scrolled back to the standards email. The analyst had asked one question. What independent fact distinguished the seizure decision from the prior release decision? Rourke did not answer immediately. He opened the canine report. The deployment section showed no trained response supporting further investigation. He opened the property history. External confirmation received in the morning. Hold continued until supervisory review. Then he opened Simone's initial paperwork. Her name appeared on the estate authorization. The inventory reference matched. Nothing had been reported stolen. Rourke closed that document. Across the hall, the sergeant who had approved the hold was reviewing the same email. He called Rourke. "You saw the comparison?" "Yes. The prior contact was released. I saw it. Why was this one different?" Rourke leaned back. "She was controlling the interaction. That isn't a property fact. She kept challenging what I was doing." The sergeant looked at his copy of the canine report. "Did she prevent verification?" "No." "Did she break the seal?" "No." "Did you identify stolen property?" "No." The sergeant tapped the earlier report. "Then answer the standards question." Rourke ended the call and opened the incident system. A supplemental narrative field appeared beneath his original report. He began typing. He did not say verification had failed. That was no longer accurate. He did not say the canine had indicated contraband. The canine report would contradict it. Instead, he changed the center of the explanation. He wrote that Simone's repeated attempts to direct the scope of the inquiry had increased uncertainty about her control of the property. He wrote that the estate documents were one factor among several. He wrote that the hold had been based on the total circumstances available at the time. Then he added that the prior incident involved a cooperative subject whose conduct had not raised similar concerns. The word sat on the screen. Cooperative. Simone had answered questions. She had produced the requested documents. She had kept the container sealed. She had remained where Rourke directed her, while another officer brought the dog around the Buick. Her difference, in the new report, was no longer what she possessed. It was how Rourke described her response to being questioned about possessing it. Before submitting the supplement, he received another message from Standards. The analyst had found the supervisor disposition on the prior incident. The same sergeant had approved release pending verification. The message asked whether any written county directive required a different result in Simone's case. Rourke opened the patrol manual. The property section gave officers discretion when ownership could not reasonably be established. It did not require a hold. It did not convert after-hours verification into probable cause. Rourke returned to the supplement. He added one sentence. Officer discretion remained necessary because documentation alone did not resolve concerns developed during the contact. He saved the draft. The sergeant called again. You can still mark the incident resolved and answer the complaint separately. Rourke kept his hand on the mouse. That would imply the hold was unnecessary. It asks whether the property issue was resolved. It was resolved after the hold. The sergeant stopped speaking for a moment. Then he said, "Your supplement is going to be reviewed with the earlier file." I understand. Rourke clicked Submit. The system stamped the supplemental narrative with the afternoon time. By then, he had the clean verification. He had the negative canine report. He had the earlier release decision. And he had been asked directly what fact made Simone different. The supplement became permanent after all four were in front of him. Simone's phone showed the cancellation before she finished breakfast. Estate release appointment paused. She opened the message. The inventory service had suspended her authorization for the remaining property, pending what it called a continuing law enforcement concern. Simone read the phrase twice. The concern had already been resolved. The estate office had confirmed her authorization. The Buick had been released. The sealed property had been returned. The county's own records showed no stolen property and no criminal charge. She called the inventory coordinator. The same woman who had spoken with her earlier answered. I just received a suspension notice. I see it. What changed? There was a short pause while the coordinator opened another screen. It came through risk review. What triggered risk review? I have a county contact attached. Which county contact? The coordinator clicked through the entry. It says patrol operations. Can you see the request? Only the summary. Simone waited. The coordinator read it. Continuing concern regarding lawful control of estate property. Related incident remains. Under administrative review. Simone reached for a pen. When was that entered? This morning. Before or after my complaint? I don't have your complaint information. Who submitted the county contact? Another pause. There's an officer name. Simone kept the pen above the paper. Please read it. Caleb Rourke. She wrote the name, then the time. The coordinator continued. I want to be clear. We're not saying you did anything wrong. Once law enforcement asks us to preserve a property control issue, our risk team usually pauses further release. Did the county say the estate authorization was invalid? No. Did they report the property stolen? No. Did they ask you to preserve evidence? I don't see that language. What exactly are you preserving? The coordinator stopped scrolling. I honestly can't answer that from this screen. Simone looked at the folder beside her. The county had verified the authorization the previous morning. Now, the lack of a property problem had become a reason to create another property restriction. Please send me the written notice. I can send the customer-facing version. And the basis field? That may be internal. Then please tell your records office I'm requesting the basis field and the county contact record. I can note that. Simone ended the call. Her scheduled pickup had been the final one. Without it, Several remaining estate items stayed in managed storage. The vendor would not release them to Simone, a mover, or an appraiser while the restriction remained active. The next available appointment was not guaranteed. Storage continued. The estate file stayed open. Simone forwarded the cancellation notice to the Standards intake analyst handling her complaint. She attached no argument. Her message contained 3 sentences. My estate release authorization was suspended this morning. The service states that Deputy Rourke initiated the county contact. Please preserve all department communications with the estate service after my complaint was filed. The analyst replied less than an hour later. Preservation request received. Nothing else. Simone printed both emails. By afternoon, the inventory service sent its customer notice. The document did not accuse her of theft. It did not call her unauthorized. It used safer language. Release temporarily restricted due to unresolved external concern. Below that was a case reference field. Simone recognized the county incident number. The same incident number now connected 3 different things: the roadside hold, the complaint, and a new restriction created after the property had already been verified. She placed the notice beside Rourke's supplemental report. His new narrative had described her conduct as one of the circumstances supporting continued concern. The estate service had not seen the roadside encounter. It had not seen the canine report. It had not compared her case with the earlier white driver. It had received a county contact. That was enough to stop the release. The following morning, Simone called the estate service again. A risk specialist had taken over the file. We can't clear this until the requesting agency withdraws the concern. The requesting agency already confirmed my authorization. I understand. Then what fact are you waiting to verify? The specialist checked the note. It doesn't identify a specific missing document. Is there a hold order? No. A court order? No. A theft report? No. Then what prevents release? The county request is still active in our system. Simone let the answer stand. She asked for the specialist's name and the release review reference. Then she ended the call. She did not contact Rourke. That afternoon, Standards notified Patrol Command that any communication concerning Simone's estate property had to be preserved with the complaint file. The notice went to the sergeant. It also went to Rourke. Several minutes later, the estate service received another county message. The language changed. The new message did not ask the company to continue the restriction. It said Patrol had no authority over the company's independent release decision. The first request was not withdrawn. The specialist added the second message to the file. The restriction stayed. Simone learned that when the automated portal updated near the end of the day, review pending, her appointment disappeared from the calendar. The storage account moved into another billing period. She opened the customer activity history available through the portal. Most entries were routine. Appointment created. Authorization verified. Release completed. Then came the new sequence. County contact received. Risk review opened. Release suspended. Follow-up county communication received. Restriction unchanged. One field remained hidden behind the service's internal record notice. Request detail. Simone could see the entry existed. She could not open it. For the first time since filing the complaint, she had more proof that the official story was moving. She also had less access to the property she had already proved she was authorized to handle. No responsive written communication located. The sentence appeared near the top of the county record's response. Simone read the rest at her kitchen table. Standards had requested every department communication with the estate inventory service beginning on the morning she filed her complaint. The department produced the follow-up message from Patrol. It produced the administrative phone log. It produced Rourke's supplemental narrative. What it did not produce was the content of the first contact. The phone log showed an outgoing call from a Patrol administrative line to the estate company's general risk number. The call lasted several minutes. That line was not recorded. There was no dispatch recording because Rourke had not used dispatch. There was no email, no attached memo, no written request for a hold. Simone called the Standards analyst. I saw the response. So did I. Did Rourke provide a statement? He did. Simone waited. The analyst read from it. Deputy Rourke states that he contacted the vendor as a professional courtesy because the property had been connected to an incident under administrative review. He states that he did not request suspension of Ms. Reed's authority and did not direct the vendor to withhold property. Simone looked at the estate cancellation notice beside her. Did he explain why he contacted them after authorization had been confirmed? He said he believed the vendor should have the complete context. What context? That's where the statement becomes general. The analyst stopped reading. Simone understood the problem. The harm was documented. The trigger was documented. The words connecting them were not. What can you establish? She asked. That he made the call. That the vendor opened risk review afterward. That the release was suspended. What I cannot establish from county records is exactly what he told them. Simone folded the record's response once. Understood. She ended the call. No argument would create a missing recording. Later that morning, the estate service sent another automated notice. Release restriction removed. Its risk department had completed an internal review. No court order existed. No evidence preservation order applied to the property. The county's follow-up communication had stated that the company controlled its own release decision. Simone could reschedule pickup. From the outside, it looked like a correction. The property was available again. The restriction was gone. The complaint remained open. Rourke had gained a cleaner explanation. He had informed a private company. The private company had made a private decision. Then the company had reversed it. By early afternoon, Simone stood at the estate warehouse with a clipboard on the counter. The coordinator checked her identification and printed the remaining release sheet. Sorry this became complicated. Simone signed where the form required. The coordinator brought out the final group of estate items. Nothing about the pickup resembled the roadside stop. No deputy stood nearby. No one questioned ownership. No one asked Simone where the property came from. The coordinator compared the inventory list with the cart, initialed the final line, and handed Simone a copy. The process took less than 20 minutes. That ordinary efficiency made the previous restriction harder to ignore. It did not make the missing evidence appear. Before leaving, Simone asked one question. Does your company keep the internal note that opened the risk review? The coordinator glanced toward the office door. I can't access compliance notes. Does that mean they aren't retained? No. It means branch staff can't open them. Who can? Central Compliance. Simone wrote that phrase on the back of her release copy. Can customers request those records? I don't know. The coordinator turned the monitor slightly toward herself. I can see that an interaction exists. I can't see the content. The same problem again. Simone thanked her and left. At home, she cleared part of the kitchen table. She placed the documents in order. First came the original estate authorization, then county verification, then Rourke's supplemental narrative, then Simone's complaint acknowledgement, then the county administrative call entry, then the vendor suspension notice, then Patrol's second message saying the company controlled its own decision. Finally, the release notice. The sequence showed movement. It did not show the sentence that caused the movement. That distinction mattered. Simone leaned back in the chair. For several minutes, she did nothing with the papers. She had spent years around administrative investigations. A suspicious sequence could justify another question. It could justify preservation. Sometimes it could justify broader review. It was not the same as proof. She pulled the supplemental narrative closer. Rourke had described her continued questioning as part of the reason officers remained concerned. After her complaint, he had called the company controlling the remaining estate property. The company had then restricted her access. Standards could prove those events occurred in that order. Rourke could still say the vendor had overreacted. The vendor could still say it had acted cautiously. Each institution could point toward the other. Simone stacked the papers again. The first county contact had failed as a direct evidentiary path. For now, she opened the release notice one more time. Most of the text concerned pickup instructions. At the bottom, beneath the customer service information, was a line she had skipped earlier. Source channel. Central Compliance Intake. Below it was an interaction reference, not the county incident number. A vendor reference. Simone opened a new email to the standards analyst. She wrote one sentence. Please ask whether Central Compliance Intake retains the source record associated with the vendor interaction reference on the attached notice. Then she attached the page. The county had no recording of Rourke's first call. The company that received it had given the contact its own number. We found the intake record. Simone Reed moved the grocery bag off the kitchen counter and set her phone beside the county documents. The standards analyst was speaking from an office line. Is it the same interaction reference? Yes. Simone pulled the estate release notice from the folder. The reference was printed near the bottom of the page. She had written Central Compliance Intake beside it in black ink. What did they preserve? A structured event record, not a recording. That distinction mattered. The analyst explained that the estate company did not store compliance contacts inside the ordinary customer account notes visible to branch employees. Central Compliance used a separate system for risk events involving police agencies, court notices, disputed authority, fraud concerns, and similar issues. That was why the branch coordinator could see that an interaction existed without seeing its contents. It was also why the county's first records request had nearly missed it. The request had asked for customer notes and communications connected to Simone's account. The company had eventually matched the interaction reference to a compliance event stored under another repository. Simone opened her notebook. Read the fields. The analyst did. The intake entry identified the source as a law enforcement contact. The agency field named the county sheriff's office. The caller field listed Deputy Rourke. The callback number matched the administrative line already produced by the county. The system creation time placed the entry during the same period shown on the county call log. None of that established what Rourke had said. Then the analyst reached the next field. Reason for contact. She paused long enough to move a page. Possible disputed ownership associated with active law enforcement review. Simone wrote the wording exactly. Next. Requested disposition. Another pause. Temporary release hold pending agency follow-up. Simone stopped writing. Read that again. The analyst repeated it. Simone looked across the table at Rourke's later statement. He had said he contacted the vendor as a professional courtesy. He had said he did not request suspension of Simone's authority. He had said he did not direct the company to withhold property. The vendor record did not use the word direct. It used something more administrative. Requested disposition. Is that free text? Simone asked. No. It's a structured field. Who selected it? The compliance employee receiving the contact. Can the caller select it? No. That made the record useful, but not magical. It was still one employee's contemporaneous classification of what the caller wanted. It was not an audio recording. It did not reveal every sentence Rourke had spoken. It did something narrower. It showed how the receiving system understood the call while it was happening. The analyst continued. The intake employee had added a short note beneath the structured fields. Simone listened without moving her pen. The note stated that the caller advised the remaining property should not be released until the sheriff's office made further contact. The note also recorded that the caller had been advised the company would make its own compliance decision. Simone wrote both points. That second sentence mattered too. Rourke had been correct about one thing. The vendor retained final authority over its property release process. But the company had exercised that authority after receiving a request from him to withhold release pending another sheriff's office contact. His later statement had separated those events. The intake record connected them. What happened next in their system? Simone asked. The analyst turned to the activity history. The compliance event was created first. A temporary restriction was entered several minutes later. The branch account then inherited the restriction automatically. That explained why the coordinator had been unable to override it. After the county sent the later message stating that no evidence hold existed and that the vendor controlled its own decision, Central Compliance reopened the event. The restriction was then removed. Each change carried a system user, a time, and a reason code. No branch employee had rewritten the earlier entry. No county employee could edit it. Simone drew a line between two phrases in her notebook. Temporary release, hold pending agency follow-up. I did not request suspension. She did not label the difference. She did not need to. Has Rourke seen this? Not from us. Will he? If it becomes part of the discrepancy review, yes. Simone closed the notebook. The analyst was quiet for a moment. There's another useful detail. Simone reopened it. The first intake record was created before the vendor restricted your account. That matches the sequence. It does. And before the county sent the follow-up message? Yes. That removed one possible explanation. The vendor had not created its description after the dispute became public inside the company. Its employee had documented the request first. The hold followed. The later clarification followed after that. Simone asked for the original production format rather than a typed summary. 2 days later, Standards provided a redacted copy through the complaint portal. The document looked ordinary. Company header, interaction reference, account identifier, source category, several gray fields stacked down the page. At the bottom sat a system activity section. Simone compared it with the county records already in her folder. County call entry, vendor intake creation, vendor hold, county follow-up, vendor release. The same sequence that had looked suspicious in Part 10 now had a contemporaneous explanation attached to its most important gap. Not every gap disappeared. The document did not prove why Rourke had chosen Simone's account for that call. It did not establish what role race had played in his decisions. It did not settle the legality of the roadside detention. Those questions still depended on the broader record. But his current explanation had acquired a problem of its own. Standards sent one more notice that afternoon. The complaint review had been expanded to include the accuracy of Rourke's statement concerning his contact with the estate service. The notice did not announce a finding. It identified a discrepancy. Simone printed it and placed it behind the vendor record. She had reached for the stapler when she noticed something on the compliance page. The phrase pending agency follow-up appeared twice. Once in the requested disposition field, once in the activity note explaining why the restriction had been opened. Rourke's later statement said the company had acted independently after receiving information. The company's own system showed what information it believed it had received, and what it believed the caller wanted done. The supervisory signature line was still blank. Simone Reed saw it on the complaint portal shortly after lunch. The document had been added beneath the central compliance intake record. Discrepancy response request. 2 sections followed. Officer response. Supervisory review. The vendor record was attached behind them. So was Rourke's earlier statement. Simone read nothing new in either attachment. That was the point. Nobody needed another document to understand the conflict. Rourke had said he did not ask the company to withhold property. Central Compliance had recorded a requested disposition of a temporary release hold pending agency follow-up. Standards had now placed both versions inside the same review packet. Rourke had been given a choice. He could amend his statement. He could explain that he had asked for a temporary pause but believed the vendor retained final authority. Or he could maintain his original wording. Simone closed the portal. She did not submit another argument. The record already contained hers. By late afternoon, the officer response field changed. Rourke had answered. His new statement was shorter than the first. He wrote that his purpose had been to request additional verification before release of disputed estate property. He maintained that the vendor made its own decision about whether to restrict the account. He also wrote that he had never issued a law enforcement seizure order. That last sentence was true. Nobody had produced one. Standards had never claimed otherwise. Simone read the paragraph again. Rourke had changed the noun. The first statement called the contact informational. The new statement called it a request for additional verification. He still did not acknowledge requesting the hold documented by the receiving employee. A line appeared beneath his response. Prior statement. Maintained. Simone printed that page. She placed it behind the original statement. The paper stack now showed 3 versions of the same event. Rourke's first description. The vendor's contemporaneous description. Rourke's response after seeing the vendor record. The next field belonged to his operational supervisor. It was completed the following morning. The supervisor did not accuse Simone of anything. The language was careful. The entry said Rourke had contacted the vendor because unresolved ownership concerns remained after the original incident. It said the vendor controlled its own release procedures. It described the difference between the records as a matter of terminology. At the bottom, the supervisor selected, "No material policy conflict identified." The signature appeared beneath it. Simone looked at the time. Then she returned to the portal index. Standards had not closed the complaint. Instead, another entry appeared several minutes later. Supervisory concurrence not accepted for closure. The standards analyst called her that afternoon. "We sent the packet back." "Why?" "The concurrence doesn't address the discrepancy." Simone opened her notebook. "What specifically remains unresolved?" "The officer says he did not request property withholding." "Yes." "The receiving system says he requested a temporary release hold." "Yes." The supervisor described that as terminology. The analyst paused. "We can't make that determination without resolving the underlying fact." Simone wrote one line. "Did standards ask Rourke to amend again?" "We gave him the option." "What did he select?" "Maintain." That was exit ramp 3. Not a confession. Not a demand that Rourke admit discrimination. Just a chance to correct a statement after an independent record showed the wording was inaccurate or incomplete. He had declined. "What happens to the evidence now?" Simone asked. "The source records are being moved to restricted review." "Meaning?" "Operations can read the produced copies. They can't replace them, annotate the originals, or close the discrepancy through the normal supervisory path." Simone stopped writing. "Who can?" "Standards, once the evidence comparison is complete." That was a different kind of restriction from the one Simone had faced. Rourke had used uncertainty to limit her access to property. Now the complaint system was using documented conflict to limit his chain of command's access to the evidence record. The analyst continued. The original Rourke statement would remain. His supplemental response would remain. The supervisor's concurrence would remain. Nothing would be deleted, simply because a later explanation had been submitted. "Please preserve every version," Simone said. "They already are." She did not ask for punishment. She did not ask standards to call Rourke dishonest. She asked one more question. "Is the county call entry preserved too?" "Yes." "And the vendor activity history?" "Yes." "Then I have nothing else to add." After the call, Simone returned the documents to the folder. She had spent weeks being asked for more proof, more context, more patience. Now the important movement was happening without another statement from her. The records were beginning to answer each other. At the sheriff's office, Rourke opened the same portal notice from a workstation. The restriction banner appeared before the complaint file loaded. He clicked the Evidence tab. The vendor record was visible. The county call entry was visible. His first statement was visible. His supplemental response was visible. The supervisory concurrence was visible. Beside each source document sat a small status field. Preserved. Rourke moved to the Complaint Disposition tab. The closure controls were unavailable. He backed out. Opened the file again. Same result. A message at the top explained that complaints containing unresolved material conflicts with independently authenticated records required standards review before disposition. His supervisor walked behind the desk. "Still locked?" Rourke kept his hand on the mouse. "They're treating two words, like they're different events." The supervisor looked at the vendor record. "Did you ask them to hold it?" "I asked them not to release anything until we followed up." The supervisor did not answer immediately. Rourke looked over. "That isn't the same as ordering a seizure." "I know." "Then what's the problem?" The supervisor moved his hand away from the back of Rourke's chair. "The problem is your first statement says you didn't ask them to withhold it." Rourke looked back at the screen. For the first time, the correction was not coming from Simone. It was coming from inside his own chain. He clicked into his supplemental response. The amendment option was still available. Standards had not removed it. He could change the record. Instead, Rourke moved to the bottom of the page. He selected Maintain Prior Response. Then he submitted it. The screen refreshed. His choice received a new timestamp. A preservation notice appeared beside it. Rourke could still answer the complaint. His command could still defend him. But on the evidence page, the access field now read Operations Read Only. The three folders were placed in separate positions on the conference table. Simone Reed's file sat in the center. Two comparator files sat to its left. The standards analyst had removed names from the comparator cases. Dates, document types, actions, and disposition remained. Across the table, Rourke's operational supervisor opened a yellow legal pad. Rourke was not present. The analyst explained that the meeting was not an interview. Nobody would be asked to agree with a conclusion. They were there to confirm what each source actually recorded. She slid a document index towards Simone. Please initial only that these are the records you were shown. Simone read the list. Estate inventory, proof of ownership, vendor intake entry, county contact record, vendor release history entry, Rourke's original statement, his supplemental response, his maintained response confirmation, supervisory concurrence, 2 comparable estate property contacts. She initialed the bottom. The operational supervisor did the same. The analyst began with the ownership issue. Simone's estate paperwork had been presented before the vendor restriction. The inventory identified the property. The executor information matched. The account information matched. No source in the packet showed a competing claimant. The supervisor tapped his pen once. There was still uncertainty about possession. The analyst looked at the matrix. Where is that recorded before Officer Rourke's contact? The supervisor turned to the vendor intake page. He read down it. The original entry described ordinary estate property processing. No fraud marker. No ownership dispute. No law enforcement seizure. He moved to the next page. The uncertainty appeared after Rourke called. The supervisor put the page down. I'm saying the officer may have had concerns not captured there. Those concerns should be in his contemporaneous record. They may have been verbal. The analyst entered something in the notes column. She did not argue. Next came the 2 comparison files. The first involved property delivered by a white estate administrator whose documentation contained a minor address mismatch. The vendor requested 1 additional document. It arrived later that morning. The property was released. No law enforcement contact occurred. The second involved an executor whose surname differed from the deceased owner's. The vendor called the probate office. The appointment was confirmed. The property was released. Simone read both files. Each contained a verification problem that could be identified on paper. Her file had not. Her driver's license matched. The estate paperwork matched. The inventory matched. Yet her case alone had generated an outside law enforcement contact, followed by a temporary release restriction. The supervisor leaned forward. Those aren't identical situations. No comparator is identical, the analyst said. My point is that the vendor acted on its own procedures in the other cases. The analyst moved 1 sheet forward. That is what we're testing. The supervisor stopped writing. The comparison matrix had 4 columns. Document issue. Verification step. Outside contact. Disposition. In the first comparator, the document issue had been an address mismatch. Verification step. Additional proof requested. Outside contact. None. Disposition. Released. In the second, the document issue had been a surname mismatch. Verification step. Probata confirmation. Outside contact. None. Disposition. Released. Simone's row began differently. Document issue. None identified an intake record. Verification step. Ownership documents accepted. Outside contact. Sheriff's office request for additional verification. Disposition. Temporary release hold. The supervisor pointed at the wording. That still says request for verification. It doesn't say the deputy controlled the vendor. The analyst nodded. We are not making that finding from this row. She turned to the chronology. The vendor had received Rourke's call. The hold status was entered shortly afterward. A later vendor note stated that release remained paused pending agency follow-up. Then came the county entry showing the follow-up had not begun from a newly discovered claimant, court order, or stolen property report. The operational concern had originated with Rourke. Finally, the vendor removed the restriction after external verification established there was no documented legal basis requiring continued withholding. The analyst placed Rourke's first statement beside that sequence. He had written that he supplied information only and did not ask the company to withhold anything. Then she placed his later response beneath it. He acknowledged asking the vendor not to release the property until additional verification occurred. The supervisor turned his pen around in his fingers. He clarified what he meant. He had that opportunity, the analyst said, and he maintained his original statement. The room stayed on the records. Nobody discussed whether Rourke was a good officer. Nobody discussed Simone's job, education, or ability to handle the complaint. The analyst asked Simone one question. Did Officer Rourke tell you about a specific defect in your estate documents before contacting the vendor? No. Did he identify another claimant? No. Clays. Did he tell you the property was reported stolen? No. The supervisor looked toward her. What did he say? Simone answered only what she remembered. He said the ownership needed more verification. Nothing else. The analyst entered the sentence. Then she opened a final sheet. It was not another incident report. It was a scope determination. Operations had proposed that the complaint be limited to whether Rourke possessed legal authority to order a vendor seizure. Standards rejected that framing. The review would instead address 3 questions: whether additional scrutiny had an objective basis, whether the agency contact materially caused or prolonged the property restriction, whether subsequent statements accurately described that contact. The supervisor read the page from top to bottom. This expands the complaint. It defines the complaint from the preserved evidence. Operations should retain disposition. The analyst slid the supervisory concurrence beside Rourke's maintained response. Operations is now part of the review. The supervisor stopped turning the pen. The analyst explained the next step. Because a supervisory finding had already characterized the documented contradiction as merely terminological, the final conduct determination would not be returned to the same operational chain. The evidence packet would go to conflict review. Operations could respond. It could submit policy. It could identify missing records. It could not issue the final complaint disposition. Simone did not speak. For months, every restriction placed on her had required her to produce something else. Another document. Another explanation. Another confirmation. This restriction worked differently. It applied to the people who had already written the official version. The analyst collected the initials page. Before closing the packet, she returned to the comparison matrix. The first 2 rows ended with the same word: released. Simone's row did not. Her documents had already passed verification. Only after the sheriff's office entered the process did the final column change to agency hold requested. Sustained. The word appeared halfway down the first page. Simone read the paragraph around it before moving to the next finding. The conflict review had separated the complaint into conduct questions instead of treating the entire event as one decision. The first concerned the additional ownership scrutiny. The finding stated that Rourke had no documented defect in Simone's estate paperwork when he initiated outside verification. The second concerned the vendor restriction. The record showed that the vendor had accepted Simone's ownership documents before Rourke contacted the company. His request caused the release process to stop. The reviewer did not call it a seizure. The reviewer did not need to. The question was whether Rourke's intervention materially changed Simone's access to property the vendor had otherwise been prepared to release. That allegation was sustained. Simone turned the page. The third finding dealt with Rourke's statements. His first response said he had provided information only. His later response acknowledged that he asked the vendor to delay release until additional verification occurred. After receiving the authenticated vendor record, he had been offered a chance to amend the first response. He selected Maintain Prior Response. The finding used narrower language than Simone expected. Materially inaccurate. Not dishonest. Not retaliatory. Not discriminatory intent. Those issues required different proof. The reviewer stayed with what the records established. Rourke described his role in a way that did not match the preserved vendor history, and he maintained that description after being shown the conflict. Sustained. The operations captain sat at the other end of the table. His copy contained a separate section. Simone noticed because the page tabs were different. He read without speaking. The reviewer waited until both had finished. "Mr. Rourke will receive his personnel notice separately," she said. "This meeting addresses disposition of the complaint." Rourke's attorney had submitted a written response that morning. It did not dispute that Simone's estate documents matched. It did not dispute the vendor chronology. Instead, It argued that Rourke had exercised reasonable caution in a situation involving inherited property and that the vendor had made its own final business decision. The reviewer had included that response in the packet. So was the vendor note entered shortly after Rourke's call. Release paused pending agency follow-up. The reviewer placed no emphasis on either document. They were simply adjacent. The captain finally spoke. An officer can raise a concern without owning every decision another business makes. That is reflected in the finding, the reviewer said. Then I don't understand the sustained allegation. The allegation is not that he controlled the company. She turned to the relevant page. It is that his intervention lacked a documented factual basis and materially caused the restriction. The captain looked down again. His own finding began on the next tab. It concerned supervisory handling. He had reviewed the vendor record. The system showed when the file became available to him. His acknowledgement appeared later that afternoon. After that, he signed the concurrence recommending closure. His written reasoning described the discrepancy between Rourke's statements as a difference in terminology. The conflict reviewer had tested that explanation against the actual sequence. The first statement said Rourke did not ask the vendor to withhold release. The second said he requested that release be delayed. Those were not two names for the same action. The captain pressed one finger against the margin. My concurrence wasn't a factual finding. It was a recommendation to close the complaint. Based on the materials available at that point, the reviewer slid the acknowledgement page toward him. This material was available. The captain read the timestamp. Then the line beneath it. His electronic acknowledgement. He had opened the preserved vendor response before signing the closure recommendation. Simone said nothing. For weeks, the disagreement had sounded abstract. Procedure, verification, caution, terminology. The timestamp gave the supervisor's decision a simpler shape. He had seen the contradiction. Then, he approved closing the complaint anyway. The supervisory allegation was sustained in part. The reviewer found no evidence that the captain had directed Rourke's original contact. That responsibility remained with Rourke. The captain's responsibility began later. He failed to resolve a known material inconsistency before recommending closure and used the operational chain to review a complaint that increasingly implicated that same chain. The findings did not give both men the same consequence. Rourke was immediately reassigned away from discretionary third-party property contacts, while the agency's personnel process considered discipline. The recommended range included a significant suspension up to separation, subject to the required employment review. The inaccurate statements were also referred for a separate professional standards determination. Nothing on the page said he was already fired. Nothing said the process was over. The captain received a different notice. He was removed from complaint disposition duties involving officers under his command. His concurrence practices would undergo supervisory review. Any discipline would be decided through the management process, but he would no longer approve closure of the read matter or related reviews. The captain read that section twice. So this applies before I have an appeal? It applies to case authority, the reviewer said. Not final discipline. He set his copy down. For the first time since Simone had entered the complaint process, nobody in operations could change its outcome by adding another explanation. The reviewer turned to Simone. You'll receive a separate remedy notice. That covers the incident classification, documented costs, and any correction to agency records. When? After the findings are entered. Simone nodded. She did not ask what punishment Rourke deserved. She did not ask the captain to apologize. Will the original label stay visible while that is pending? The history stays preserved. The reviewer tapped a different field. The current status will show that the underlying ownership concern was not substantiated. That distinction mattered. The old entry would not vanish. Future reviewers would be able to see what had been written. They would also see what the independent process found. The reviewer handed 2 acknowledgement forms across the table. At the top, in bold type, a sentence explained exactly what the signature meant. Signature confirms receipt only. It does not indicate agreement. The captain signed. The reviewer collected his form and placed it in the disposition packet. A few minutes later, another electronic acknowledgement arrived from Rourke. His personnel notice had been delivered. His operational permissions were updated afterward. The system removed one function from his profile. He could still view ordinary case material. He could no longer initiate third-party property holds without supervisory authorization. The same process that had once accepted his concern without requiring a documented defect now required one before his request could restrict someone else's property again. The access change was saved. What the record could return. The search result no longer said active ownership concern. Simone read the replacement twice. Unsubstantiated, no documented ownership defect. The original entry still existed beneath it. Not in the ordinary screen an officer would see during a routine inquiry. It remained in the audit history. That was what Simone had requested. She had never asked anyone to erase the first entry. Erasing it would make the file cleaner than the truth. She wanted the record to show what had been entered, what evidence had existed at the time, and what the independent review eventually found. The correction notice arrived with 3 other documents. The first came from risk management. Every expense connected to the restriction appeared on its own line. Vendor storage charges, additional transportation costs, document copying fees, a filing expense Simone had paid when she began challenging the hold. Each approved amount had a receipt number beside it. One expense was denied because risk management could not connect it directly to the restriction. The others were approved. There was no dramatic settlement. There was a page of numbers tied to actual losses. Someone had finally counted what the extra days had cost. The second document concerned the complaint. Its operational status was closed. Its audit history remained preserved. Any authorized future review of the case would show the corrected finding beside the original classification. The third notice concerned Caleb Rourke. He had completed the agency's pre-disciplinary process. The final decision sustained misuse of discretionary authority and materially inaccurate reporting. His employment was terminated after that process concluded. The finding did not claim that investigators had proven every thought behind his decisions. It did not need to. The record showed what he had done. Rourke had expanded an ordinary inquiry after ownership documentation had already been verified. He had caused a third party to restrict Simone's property without documenting a new ownership defect. He had later described his own role more narrowly than the records supported. He had maintained that version after contradictory information was available. One paragraph near the bottom carried a consequence Simone had not expected to see in the first notice. Because the sustained findings involved misuse of police authority and materially inaccurate official reporting, the agency had transmitted the final disposition to the appropriate state certification review process. That process was separate. No outcome was promised. Rourke would receive whatever notice and response rights applied there. The agency could terminate his employment. It could not decide by itself whether the findings should affect his ability to work elsewhere as an officer. That decision had left the building. There was another line. A limited administrative audit had been opened on recent third-party property restrictions initiated by Rourke. Not his entire career. Not every stop he had ever made. Only requests involving the same type of outside business hold that had been used against Simone. The review would compare the stated basis, available ownership documents, supervisor approval, vendor response, and duration of each restriction. Simone set the page down. For weeks, Rourke's request had forced everyone else to examine her. Now his requests were the records being examined. The captain's outcome was different. He had not initiated the roadside encounter. He had not made Rourke's first call to the vendor. His formal reprimand addressed the decision he made afterward. He had reviewed contradictory material and still recommended closing the complaint without resolving the contradictions. He remained removed from complaint disposition authority while completing supervisory remediation. His future reviews would require secondary approval for a defined period. The difference mattered. Responsibility had been assigned according to what each person knew and what each person had authority to do. Simone folded the notices back into their envelope. There was another change that did not depend on either man. The agency had replaced its informal third-party property contact practice with a documented request process. An officer asking a business to delay the release of property now had to enter the factual basis. Further verification was no longer enough by itself. The request required an identified supervisor. The system preserved who initiated it, when it was approved, what facts supposedly required the restriction, and when the request expired. If a vendor reported that ownership documents had already been verified, that answer became part of the same record. A later supervisor could not review only the officer's summary. The outside response appeared beside it. The change looked small on a computer screen. A few required fields: an approval box, a timestamp, an expiration entry, a preserved vendor response. It addressed the exact gap that had allowed Simone's case to grow. Rourke had once been able to turn uncertainty into authority simply by asking for more verification. Now the uncertainty had to be written down. The complaint routing rule changed too. When a supervisor had materially participated in a disputed decision, that supervisor could no longer recommend the final disposition of the complaint challenging it. The file moved outside that chain. There was no ceremony, no press conference, no room filled with people applauding. Simone found the language in the remedy packet. That was enough. Later that afternoon, she drove to the vendor lot. She had recovered the property earlier, but one administrative item remained there: the original release sleeve. The vendor had kept it with its internal copy during the dispute. The clerk retrieved it from a filing cabinet. The clear plastic had a white label across the front: Simone's name. The property reference: the date the vendor had originally approved release. Below it was the handwritten notation that had stopped everything. Agency requested additional verification. A second line had been added: request unsupported. Release authorization previously valid. The clerk slid the sleeve across the counter. You can keep this copy. Simone looked at the first approval time. It came before Rourke's call. For weeks, that difference had been buried beneath words like caution, discretion, cooperation, and procedure. Now both events occupied the same piece of plastic. Approved, then stopped. Not because new ownership evidence had failed, because someone with authority had asked the vendor to doubt what it had already verified. Simone placed the sleeve inside her bag. Outside, the property sat where she had left it. No patrol car waited nearby. No supervisor needed to approve her departure. No additional verification requests sat in a vendor system. She unlocked it. The reimbursement would not return the hours spent calling people who had already confirmed her documents. The corrected record could not remove the days when suspicion had been treated as the starting point instead of the result of evidence. Rourke losing his job could not change the fact that his first unsupported request had worked. The system had accepted it. That was why the smaller changes mattered. The next officer making the same request would leave behind a factual basis: a name, a supervisor, a timestamp, a vendor response, an expiration. And if those records contradicted each other, the contradiction would already exist before anyone had time to rewrite the story. Simone sat behind the wheel and placed the envelope on the passenger seat. The corrected notice was inside. So was the original release sleeve. She inserted the key, then stopped. The small worn tag attached to it rested against her fingers. Months earlier, a valid document had not been enough to end a question that should already have been over. She turned the key. This time, nobody asked her to explain why it belonged to her. This story is fictional.